It had been a long day filled with meetings, briefings, and decisions that weighed heavily on him. The FBI director, a man who had spent decades serving his country, had grown accustomed to responsibility and pressure. Yet even he needed moments of quiet, moments when he could simply be himself and leave the weight of authority behind, if only for a short drive home. That evening, the streets were quiet. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving a faint glow across the skyline. Traffic was sparse, and the hum of the tires on the asphalt was soothing. It was exactly the kind of calm that made him exhale deeply and forget, just for a moment, the constant vigilance his job demanded. As he drove along a suburban street, thinking about the events of the day, he barely noticed the flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. At first he thought it was a routine patrol. Perhaps someone else needed attention. But as the lights drew closer, a knot formed in his stomach. He slowed down and signaled, pulling his car to the side as any law-abiding citizen would. His mind ran through all the possibilities: a simple traffic violation, a mix-up, or perhaps something more serious. Either way, he remained calm, trusting that honesty and clarity would guide him through the encounter. The officer approached with a brisk pace, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. The director rolled down his window and offered a polite greeting, expecting the usual questions about speed or license and registration. But the tone that met him was sharp, almost hostile, and it sent a shock through him. This was not the standard courtesy one expected from law enforcement trained to handle citizens with care and professionalism. "Step out of the vehicle, hands where I can see them," the officer barked. The command was sudden, aggressive, and left little room for explanation. The director froze for a brief second, taken aback. He complied immediately, stepping out slowly, his hands raised just as instructed. His heart raced, but he focused on staying calm, on following the officer's orders without hesitation. He could see the surprise in his own reflection in the car's side mirror. The director of the FBI, a person who had handled high-stakes operations and confronted dangerous criminals, was now standing in the glow of police lights, hands in the air, unsure of why he was being treated as a threat. He tried to speak, to explain, but the officer's voice cut him off with another sharp command. The tension in the air was thick. The quiet street now seemed oppressive, the shadows of the trees and the glow of the street lamps creating an almost surreal scene. The director felt the eyes of nearby houses on him, as if the world outside had paused to watch this strange interaction. He looked around, hoping someone else, another officer or a passerby, would notice something amiss. There were a few distant headlights on the road, a car passing slowly, but no one seemed to intervene. As he stood there, he tried to make sense of it all. He remembered the countless times he had worked alongside law enforcement, advising them, guiding them, respecting their authority. And yet here he was, in a position of complete vulnerability, relying solely on the hope that reason and recognition would prevail. He felt a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and a deep awareness of the fragility of human perception. In that moment, he understood fully how easily fear and misunderstanding could escalate into dangerous situations. The officer's movements were tense, almost jittery, and every command seemed to be delivered with heightened emotion. The director noticed small details that made his heart beat faster. The way the officer's hand hovered near his weapon, the quick scanning of the surroundings, the abrupt, almost impatient gestures. The director's mind raced through possibilities. Was this a misunderstanding? A case of mistaken identity? Or had the officer simply reacted poorly under stress? He remained silent, letting the officer do the talking, choosing words carefully only when necessary. He presented his identification not as a demand but as proof, a means to bridge the gap between fear and understanding. The officer glanced at it briefly, then back up, his expression hard to read. The director could sense hesitation, confusion, perhaps even the faint spark of recognition, but it wasn't enough to break the tension. Seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. The director noticed the faint sound of sirens in the distance. His mind quickly calculated possibilities: reinforcement on the way, a routine check, or someone else responding to an emergency. He held his stance, careful not to make sudden movements that could escalate the situation further. Each moment required balance, calm, and the smallest gestures of patience and compliance. Time seemed to slow. He reflected on his career, the moments of danger he had faced, the decisions that had saved lives, and now, this strange role reversal where he was on the receiving end of fear and misjudgment. It was a humbling and unnerving experience. He could feel the sweat on his brow, the tension in his shoulders, but he did not allow panic to take over. Experience and discipline guided his behavior, and he knew that any wrong move could make things worse. The officer finally took a step back, scanning the area, muttering to himself. The director stayed perfectly still, voice calm, hands visible, making no sudden motions. He observed the surrounding environment, taking note of the quiet homes, the few dim streetlights, and the occasional passing car, all of which seemed insignificant in contrast to the high stakes of the moment. A car pulled into view further down the road. Its headlights cut through the darkness, and the director immediately sensed a change. Perhaps another officer had arrived or a concerned citizen was approaching. The sound of the car seemed both promising and tense, adding a new layer to the already charged atmosphere. The officer holding him at gunpoint glanced toward the approaching vehicle, his demeanor momentarily shifting. It was subtle, but enough to suggest recognition that perhaps he was not entirely in control of the situation. The director maintained his calm, his breathing controlled, his eyes focused but not confrontational. He understood that at this moment, words were secondary to actions. He was a trained observer, and he used that skill to assess the officer's behavior, the environment, and the potential for escalation or resolution. Each second was critical, and he relied on his experience to navigate this precarious situation. He could feel the weight of responsibility even now, not just for himself, but for the officer as well. He understood that fear could drive even experienced law enforcement personnel to make mistakes, and that patience and clarity were essential in resolving such encounters. He reminded himself to stay grounded, to keep his movements deliberate and slow, and to project calm, even in the face of uncertainty. The approaching vehicle grew closer, and with it, a sense of hope. Perhaps someone would notice the unusual tension, the aggressive stance of the officer, or the calm but tense presence of the man at gunpoint. The director's mind ran through the next steps. Remain visible, avoid sudden moves, and communicate as necessary, all while keeping the situation as non-threatening as possible. Moments later, a second officer arrived on the scene. The director felt a subtle but significant shift in the atmosphere. The second officer's presence brought an immediate sense of balance, a reassurance that the situation was not left to escalate unchecked. The first officer's posture seemed to relax slightly, though the weapon remained drawn. The director recognized this as an opportunity, a chance for clarity, for understanding, and for the situation to be resolved without harm. He remained steady, confident that professionalism and reason would prevail. He observed the second officer's approach, noting the calmness in his movements, the controlled voice, and the evident assessment of the situation. The contrast between the two officers was stark, highlighting the unpredictability of human behavior under stress. The director knew that the next moments would be critical in determining the outcome. Throughout the encounter, he remained respectful, compliant, and focused, never letting fear dominate his actions. His training, experience, and natural composure allowed him to navigate a scenario that could have turned dangerous in an instant. He understood fully the stakes, the potential consequences, and the lessons that could be learned from this encounter. Finally, the tension began to shift. The second officer's presence and calm assessment created an opening for explanation and understanding. The director could see that recognition and reason were starting to pierce through the fog of misunderstanding. The first officer's grip on his weapon began to loosen, and the commands became less severe. It was a subtle but meaningful change, indicating that the situation could be de-escalated without harm. As the scene began to stabilize, the director remained vigilant, observing every detail, every movement, and every expression. He knew that patience, composure, and respect were essential, not only for his safety but for the resolution of the incident. Each moment was a test of human judgment, professionalism, and the delicate balance between fear and reason. By the time the first part of the encounter concluded, the director had maintained his calm and clarity, proving that even in moments of extreme stress, measured behavior could prevent tragedy. He stood as a reminder of the importance of discipline, experience, and empathy, and the encounter, though tense, began to shift toward understanding. The night was quiet once more, but the lessons of that brief, tense interaction would linger. a powerful testament to the unpredictable nature of human encounters and the enduring value of composure and clarity under pressure. The night air felt heavy as the FBI director stood with his hands raised, every nerve alert. The tension in his chest was undeniable, yet he forced himself to breathe steadily, keeping his mind sharp. He had been trained for high-pressure situations, but being held at gunpoint by a fellow law enforcement officer was something he never imagined experiencing. He knew any wrong move could escalate the situation, so he remained still, his eyes fixed on the officer, his thoughts racing through strategies and possibilities. The officer's voice was harsh, sharp, and impatient. Commands were barked rapidly, almost too fast to follow properly. The director complied with each one, moving slowly, deliberately, showing no sign of defiance. He understood that calmness, not argument, was his greatest weapon in this moment, even though his mind was spinning, trying to comprehend how he, a figure of authority and decades of experience, could be mistaken for a threat. He maintained an outward composure. The night around them was quiet except for the occasional distant siren, the hum of tires on asphalt, and the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Streetlights cast a muted glow, creating long shadows that seemed to stretch toward the two men standing tensely on the quiet suburban road. It was a scene that seemed almost surreal, as if time had slowed to make every second feel like a test of patience and judgment. He noticed subtle details that made his pulse quicken. The officer's hand hovered near the weapon, ready to act at a moment's notice. The tension in his stance suggested fear, aggression, or confusion, and the director recognized the danger in that mix. Every gesture mattered. Every breath and movement could signal intent, and the director knew he had to manage the moment with extreme care. As he thought about the next steps, he tried to communicate, to explain his identity calmly and clearly. "I am the FBI director," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I am here to cooperate and ensure we resolve this safely." But the officer barely reacted, focused instead on what he perceived as a potential threat. It was a chilling reminder that perception can sometimes overpower facts. The director's mind raced with questions. Was this a case of mistaken identity? Was the officer acting on incorrect information? Perhaps a dispatch error or a misunderstanding? Could there be an underlying reason for this aggression? He did not know, but he understood that speculation had to be set aside in favor of measured action. The key was patience, clarity, and careful observation. The situation was further complicated by the presence of a few distant cars and the faint lights of houses lining the street. Each shadow and reflection added to the uncertainty. He could sense that someone might be watching, yet he remained focused on the immediate interaction. The reality of being at the mercy of someone else's fear and judgment was sobering, and he recognized the vulnerability inherent in every human encounter, even for those trained to manage danger. Minutes passed that felt like hours. The officer's eyes darted around nervously and his commands became erratic. The director continued to comply, keeping his hands visible, moving only when instructed. He understood the importance of body language, of showing that he was no threat. Each motion had to convey respect, patience, and a willingness to cooperate. He thought about the people he had protected over the years, the decisions he had made under extreme pressure, and the lives that had depended on his calm and judgment. And now, in a twist of fate, he was on the receiving end, experiencing firsthand how fear and misunderstanding could escalate even in trained hands. It was a humbling moment, and it reinforced his belief in the importance of empathy and clear communication in every human interaction. The distant siren grew louder, and he realized help might be on the way. Hope flickered, but he remained cautious. He could not assume safety until the situation was fully resolved. His training reminded him that unpredictability was part of every encounter, and readiness was essential. He focused on every detail, the officer's tone, posture, and micro-expressions, analyzing and anticipating potential reactions. Suddenly, the officer shifted, his grip on the weapon tightening. There was a subtle tension in his stance that suggested a heightened sense of danger, even though the director had made no threatening moves. It was a stark illustration of how fear can drive behavior, how perception can override logic. The director remained calm, inwardly acknowledging the power of fear and the challenge of de-escalating it. He continued to communicate in a low, steady voice, offering clarity and reassurance. "I understand your caution," he said, "and I want to cooperate fully. Please allow me to show you my identification." He extended his hand slowly, displaying his credentials clearly. The officer glanced at them, but recognition was slow and the tension did not immediately ease. It was a delicate moment, balancing authority, trust, and the need for patience. The director's thoughts wandered briefly to the broader implications. How often did fear and miscommunication create unnecessary danger? How many encounters ended poorly because someone acted without clarity or perspective? He recognized that this was not just about him, it was about human behavior, the fragility of judgment and the responsibility that comes with power. Whether in law enforcement or leadership, he noticed the officer's breathing, the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his eyes shifted quickly. Each detail was a clue, a signal of stress, uncertainty, or misjudgment. The director's experience allowed him to interpret these signs without panic, using them to guide his own behavior. Patience, clarity, and calmness were essential, and he relied on these tools as carefully as any physical skill. The night continued with slow, tense progress. Each word spoken, each gesture made, required deliberate intention. The director remained a model of composure, showing that experience and self-control could influence the outcome, even when faced with aggression and misunderstanding. He was fully aware of the stakes and the potential for things to escalate, and he acted accordingly. Finally, the sound of approaching footsteps and the glint of headlights in the distance signaled a potential turning point. Another officer was arriving, and the director sensed the shift in the atmosphere immediately. The presence of a second, calm and observant officer offered the possibility of clarity, an opportunity to resolve the situation safely. He remained steady, ready to cooperate fully, trusting that reason and professionalism would prevail. The first officer glanced toward the approaching vehicle, a flicker of recognition and hesitation crossing his face. The director held his position, hands raised, voice calm, waiting for the second officer to intervene. The tension between compliance and caution was palpable, but the director's disciplined presence helped anchor the moment, preventing a potentially tragic outcome. As the second officer neared, the first officer's grip on the weapon eased slightly. Though the sense of tension lingered, the director understood that this was the moment where understanding could begin to replace fear. Patience, respect, and careful communication had kept the situation from escalating, demonstrating the importance of composure in moments of crisis. Throughout the encounter, the director remained fully aware of the broader lessons unfolding. This was not merely a personal experience, it was a reflection of human behavior, the impact of stress, and the importance of training, empathy, and discipline. He remained a calm presence, an example of how to navigate fear and misunderstanding without succumbing to panic or aggression. The night air remained still, heavy with anticipation. Each passing second brought new possibilities, the resolution of the encounter, the lessons to be learned, and the reflection on the unpredictability of human judgment. The director's mind remained focused, his actions deliberate, and his composure unwavering. By the end of this tense period, the director had maintained his calm, navigated the officer's aggression, and prepared for the arrival of a second perspective. The encounter had been harrowing, yet it highlighted the importance of patience, clarity, and measured action in moments of extreme uncertainty. The night was far from over, but the director's steadfast presence ensured that the path toward resolution had begun, grounded in reason, experience, and the enduring strength of human composure under pressure. The second officer arrived quickly, his presence immediately changing the dynamics of the situation. He moved with a calm, deliberate stride, taking in the scene with practiced precision. The first officer, still holding the weapon, paused for a moment, glancing between the two men, uncertainty flickering across his face. The FBI director remained steady, his hands raised, ready to cooperate fully. He recognized that this moment could bring clarity, but also that the tension could still explode if handled poorly. The second officer spoke in a low, even tone. "Sir, step back and lower your weapon," he instructed, focusing on the first officer. His words were measured, commanding attention without escalating the situation. Slowly, the first officer began to relax, his grip on the firearm loosening slightly. The director felt a surge of hope, but he knew better than to assume the danger had passed entirely. "Sir, please identify yourself," the second officer said, turning his attention to the director. Calmly, he extended his hand for the identification that the director had already prepared. "I am the FBI director," the director replied steadily. "Here are my credentials. I am fully cooperating and want to resolve this safely." The second officer examined the credentials carefully, his expression transitioning from cautious to understanding. Recognition began to replace doubt. The first officer's eyes shifted between the director's identification and the second officer's calm assessment. He blinked several times as if trying to reconcile the situation in his mind. The director observed quietly, noting the subtle signs of hesitation and internal conflict. Fear had driven the first officer to act aggressively, but now clarity and reason were beginning to take hold. It was a delicate balance, and the director remained patient, knowing that rushing or arguing could undo the progress. The second officer took a step closer to the first, lowering his voice and speaking in a controlled manner. "We have made a mistake here. Stand down and relax," he said. Slowly, the first officer began to comply, placing the weapon back into its holster. The tension in his shoulders eased and the rigid posture softened. The director exhaled quietly, relief mingling with lingering shock. He had navigated a situation where trust, discipline, and patience were tested to their limits. The scene, which had felt surreal moments ago, began to normalize. The director lowered his hands gradually, maintaining a cautious stance. The second officer moved with purpose, speaking calmly to the first officer and explaining the misunderstanding. It became clear that a miscommunication or error in judgment had triggered the aggressive response. The director remained composed, aware that this moment was both a relief and a lesson in human behavior. Nearby, the quiet neighborhood seemed to watch in muted curiosity. Lights from distant houses flickered, and the occasional rustle of leaves provided a subtle soundtrack to the unfolding resolution. The director noted these small details, grounding himself in reality while the tension gradually dissolved. He understood that such moments of fear and misunderstanding were more common than people realized, but that careful, disciplined responses could prevent disaster. The first officer, now more composed, began to speak quietly with the second officer, acknowledging the mistake and accepting guidance on the proper procedure. His earlier aggression had been fueled by fear and confusion, but the presence of a calm, authoritative figure had allowed him to recalibrate. The director watched silently, offering no interference, understanding that this was a moment for the officers to regain control of their professional judgment. Throughout the encounter, the director remained a model of calm professionalism. His body language, voice, and demeanor served as a stabilizing force, demonstrating the importance of self-control under stress. He reflected on his own experiences in law enforcement, recognizing the fine line between perception and reality, between fear and action. Each moment underscored the fragility of human judgment and the importance of training, empathy, and clear communication. The second officer continued to de-escalate the situation, speaking softly to both the first officer and the director. He explained that misidentification had occurred and that the situation was under control. The director listened carefully, nodding in understanding, appreciating the methodical approach. He knew that in such high-stakes moments, emotions could cloud judgment, and steady guidance was essential to prevent further escalation. The first officer, now fully aware of the director's identity and the mistake that had been made, expressed a mix of relief and embarrassment. The director remained professional, offering no judgment, only composure. He understood that accountability and learning were critical, and that maintaining dignity in the aftermath was part of resolving any conflict effectively. His calm presence allowed the officers to navigate their own responses without interference. As the situation settled, the director reflected on the broader implications. The incident highlighted the importance of training, awareness, and the ability to manage fear under pressure. He recognized that even well-trained individuals could make mistakes when confronted with unexpected scenarios, and that patience, clarity, and controlled responses were vital to ensuring safety. It was a powerful reminder of the responsibilities carried by those in law enforcement and leadership positions. The second officer, now coordinating with the first, began to organize the next steps. They discussed documenting the incident, ensuring accountability, and reviewing procedures to prevent similar occurrences. The director observed attentively, appreciating the methodical approach. The focus was on learning and improvement, reinforcing the principles of professionalism, respect, and safety. Neighbors who had watched from a distance began to retreat, reassured that the situation was under control. The street, once charged with tension, returned to its quiet rhythm. The director remained vigilant but relaxed slightly, understanding that the immediate danger had passed. His thoughts lingered on the fragility of human perception, the power of fear, and the importance of measured response. It was a moment that would remain vivid in his memory, a lesson in humility and awareness. The first officer, now guided by the second, approached the documentation process with a mix of professionalism and nervous energy. He understood the gravity of the mistake and the responsibility to correct it. The director observed silently, recognizing the human element in every decision, the balance between authority and accountability, and the role of guidance and oversight in preventing harm. Throughout the process, the director maintained a calm presence, reinforcing the importance of patience and clarity. He spoke only when necessary, offering information and clarification in a measured tone. His demeanor influenced the atmosphere, helping the officers focus on resolution rather than escalation. It was a testament to the impact of leadership, experience, and composure in moments of uncertainty. As the officers worked through the incident, the director reflected on the lessons learned. Fear and misjudgment could create dangerous situations, but disciplined, calm responses could mitigate risk and guide people toward understanding. The experience reinforced his belief in empathy, clear communication, and the importance of professionalism in every human interaction. It was a moment that combined relief, reflection, and education, highlighting the unpredictable nature of human encounters. The second officer concluded his assessment and began explaining the procedures for reporting and accountability. The first officer listened carefully, absorbing the guidance with a sense of responsibility. The director watched, appreciating the structured approach. The emphasis on learning, safety, and accountability was evident, reinforcing the values that governed both his own work and that of the officers around him. By the end of this part of the encounter, the FBI director had maintained composure, navigated fear and aggression, and witnessed the resolution of a tense misunderstanding. The officers were moving toward accountability and reflection, and the street had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The director's presence had been a stabilizing force, demonstrating the power of calm, clarity, and human-centered response in moments of extreme stress. The night continued, quiet and still, but the lessons of the encounter lingered. The director understood that every human interaction carried potential for misunderstanding, but that patience, empathy, and discipline could guide people toward resolution. The experience underscored the fragility of trust, the power of composure, and the importance of maintaining dignity and professionalism, even in unexpected and tense circumstances. It was a night that would remain vivid in memory, a story of fear, reason, and the enduring value of calm, leadership under pressure. The tension that had gripped the quiet, suburban street slowly began to fade as the first officer's weapon was holstered, and the second officer guided the situation toward order. The FBI director lowered his hands fully now, taking a cautious step back, though he remained vigilant. Every muscle in his body had been tense for what felt like hours, and yet he knew the situation was not completely resolved. There were still questions to answer, procedures to follow, and consequences to face. The first officer's face showed a mixture of relief and embarrassment. His aggressive stance had melted under the calm guidance of the second officer, and he now seemed aware of the gravity of his earlier actions. The director observed silently, aware that this moment required careful management. He wanted to ensure the situation would end peacefully, without further escalation, while allowing the officers to maintain their professional dignity. The second officer addressed both men, his voice steady and authoritative. He explained that a misidentification had caused the confrontation and that the immediate danger had passed. The first officer nodded, his shoulders still tense but beginning to relax. The director felt a sense of relief but remained alert. He knew that de-escalation in tense moments required continuous attention and careful observation. The director's mind replayed the events of the past minutes. He had been pulled over unexpectedly, treated as a threat, and held at gunpoint. Every detail was vivid. The aggressive commands, the tension in the officer's posture, the faint sounds of distant cars and sirens. and the way he had had to manage his own fear while remaining composed. Now standing in the relative calm, he reflected on the unpredictable nature of human behavior and the importance of remaining steady under pressure. As the officers began to coordinate, the director provided clarification, answering questions calmly and professionally. He maintained a respectful tone, recognizing that accountability and clarity were crucial to resolving the incident. His actions and demeanor set the tone for the interaction, guiding the officers toward a measured and thoughtful response. The first officer, still processing the situation, began to cooperate fully with the procedures. He acknowledged the mistake, followed instructions carefully, and assisted in documenting the encounter. The director observed, offering no judgment, understanding that learning and accountability were essential outcomes. The tension that had dominated the night now shifted to focus and responsibility. The second officer managed the process with methodical precision. He ensured the first officer's compliance, verified the director's identity once more, and began recording details for the official report. The director noted the professionalism and dedication to procedure, appreciating the importance of proper documentation and accountability. He knew that these steps would prevent similar incidents in the future and would serve as a teaching moment for all involved. The surrounding environment, once oppressive and tense, regained its normal rhythm. Streetlights cast soft pools of light. The occasional car passed at a slow pace, and the quiet of the neighborhood returned. The director remained aware, recognizing that the residual effects of fear and misunderstanding could linger, but the immediate danger had passed. He allowed himself a quiet, controlled breath, letting the relief settle in while staying vigilant. The first officer, now fully aware of the director's identity and the misjudgment, expressed his remorse quietly. The director responded professionally, emphasizing that the priority was understanding and resolution rather than anger or blame. He understood that human error could occur, especially under stress, and that measured, thoughtful guidance could transform a tense encounter into an opportunity for growth and learning. The second officer, observing the interaction, ensured that the process followed protocol. He spoke clearly, explained next steps, and encouraged the first officer to remain professional and responsible. The director listened attentively, appreciating the structure and order that were being restored. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the initial moments, highlighting the importance of calm, deliberate action in crisis situations. As the documentation continued, the director reflected on the lessons of the encounter. Fear and misunderstanding could escalate quickly, but patience, clarity, and empathy could de-escalate even the most dangerous situations. He considered how the experience would inform his own leadership, reinforcing the importance of calm guidance, careful observation, and respect for human complexity. The first officer completed his part of the documentation and handed the information to the second officer, who reviewed it with care. Both officers now focused on following proper procedures, ensuring accountability and learning from the mistake. The director observed quietly, understanding that this process was as important as the immediate de-escalation. It was a testament to the role of structured response and professional behavior in maintaining safety and integrity. Neighbors, who had briefly watched from a distance, began to retreat back into their homes, reassured that the situation was under control. The director acknowledged the small but significant change in the environment. The street, once charged with fear and tension, now reflected the return of normalcy and order. It was a relief to know that the immediate crisis had passed, though the experience would remain vivid in memory. The director spoke with both officers to clarify the next steps, ensuring that the proper reports were filed and that accountability measures were followed. He remained composed, measured, and professional, modeling the behavior he had relied on to navigate the encounter safely. His presence reinforced the importance of maintaining dignity, clarity, and patience, even in situations where fear and misunderstanding could dominate. As the first officer processed the instructions, his demeanor reflected a mix of relief and seriousness. The director remained calm, guiding the interaction with quiet authority. He understood that the situation had tested everyone involved, highlighting the unpredictable nature of human response and the need for clear communication and professional behavior under stress. The second officer continued to ensure compliance with protocol, explaining the importance of documentation, accountability, and reflection. The director listened, providing clarification and support where necessary. The process, though meticulous, served to solidify understanding and prevent future incidents. It emphasized the value of structured response and the necessity of maintaining control under pressure. The director reflected on his role throughout the encounter. His composure, patience, and professionalism had not only protected himself but also guided the officers toward a safe and orderly resolution. He recognized the profound impact that calm leadership could have in moments of high tension. It was a reminder that human behavior is delicate, perception can be flawed, and measured response can prevent disaster. By the end of the encounter on the street, the officers had regained control of the situation. The director had remained safe and order had been restored. The first officer faced accountability. The second officer had successfully managed the resolution, and the director's calm presence had influenced the outcome positively. The night was quiet again, the tension replaced by reflection and the slow return to normal life. The director took a moment to gather his thoughts, considering the lessons learned from the incident. Human error, fear, and misunderstanding could create dangerous scenarios, but discipline, patience, and empathy could transform potential chaos into learning and growth. The experience reinforced the value of professionalism, clarity, and measured action in every encounter, highlighting the importance of leadership, composure, and understanding in managing complex human interactions. The night air had grown quieter, leaving only the subtle hum of distant traffic and the faint rustle of leaves. The immediate danger had passed, but the weight of the incident lingered in the minds of everyone involved. The FBI director, standing on the quiet suburban street, allowed himself a slow breath, feeling the tension gradually release from his shoulders. The encounter had been tense, unpredictable, and dangerous, yet it had ended without physical harm. Even so, the experience left an indelible mark, a reminder of the fragility of human perception and the importance of composure under pressure. The first officer, now more composed but still visibly shaken, began the process of formal accountability. The second officer guided him through the necessary steps, documenting the events, reporting the actions that had led to the misunderstanding, and preparing for the next phase of internal review. The FBI director observed quietly, maintaining professionalism and patience. He knew that these procedures were crucial not only for justice and accountability, but also for learning and preventing similar situations in the future. Neighbors who had briefly observed the event from their windows or driveways had returned indoors, their curiosity tempered by relief that the confrontation had concluded without violence. The quiet of the night was a stark contrast to the intensity of the preceding minutes. The director noted the shift, recognizing the return of normalcy as a sign that fear could be managed, misunderstandings could be corrected, and order could be restored. The first officer completed his report, detailing his actions, thought process, and the realization of the mistake. The second officer reviewed the documentation, ensuring that every detail was accurately captured and that accountability measures were correctly noted. The director offered clarification when needed, providing his perspective calmly and respectfully. His presence ensured that the interaction remained professional, measured, and focused on resolution rather than blame. As the officers finished the immediate administrative steps, the director reflected on the broader implications. He had been in countless high-pressure situations during his career, but this experience was different. It was a stark reminder that even those trained to handle danger could be vulnerable, misjudged, or misunderstood. It emphasized the importance of empathy, patience, and calm communication in all human interactions. The first officer, still processing the events, expressed sincere regret for his actions. He had acted out of fear and misperception, but the guidance and intervention of the second officer allowed him to regain control and begin the necessary process of accountability. The director listened, acknowledging the officer's honesty without judgment. He understood that learning from mistakes and taking responsibility were essential elements of professionalism and growth. The second officer, experienced and composed, ensured that every step of the follow-up was handled appropriately. He explained procedures for reporting the incident, the expected review process, and the potential consequences for the first officer's actions. The director remained engaged, offering insight where needed and ensuring clarity, understanding that effective resolution required careful communication and cooperation. As the documentation and initial review concluded, the director considered the personal lessons learned. Remaining calm under extreme stress had been crucial in preserving safety and de-escalating the situation. Clear communication, patience, and empathy had guided the resolution. He realized how quickly fear and misunderstanding could escalate, but also how controlled, thoughtful responses could prevent harm. These insights were valuable not only for law enforcement professionals, but for anyone navigating high-stakes interactions. The neighborhood had returned to silence, the quiet punctuated only by distant car engines and the occasional chirp of nightbirds. The director felt a sense of closure, understanding that while the events of the night were intense, they had highlighted important lessons about human behavior, trust, and professionalism. Even in moments of misjudgment and fear, reason and composure could prevail. The first officer was escorted to a patrol vehicle, following proper protocol, while the second officer stayed to ensure that the director was safe and that the documentation was complete. The director reflected on the power of structure, training, and clear procedures in managing unpredictable situations. Each action taken by the officers, guided by protocol and calm leadership, had contributed to a peaceful resolution. As the director prepared to leave, he considered the broader implications for law enforcement. Mistakes could happen, but how they were managed made the difference between escalation and resolution. Accountability, transparency, and reflection were essential for maintaining public trust and ensuring that errors did not lead to harm. The director's experience underscored the importance of these principles in real-world scenarios. The officers had followed through with professionalism, ensuring that every aspect of the incident was documented and reviewed. The director acknowledged their efforts, recognizing that their ability to adapt and respond appropriately had prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. His own composure had played a role, demonstrating the impact that calm, measured behavior can have in influencing others during high-stress situations. Driving away later that night, the director reflected on the series of events. The fear, tension, and uncertainty had been intense, but the resolution had been managed with dignity, patience, and professionalism. He understood the lessons of empathy, clarity, and responsibility would stay with him, influencing how he approached both his work and personal interactions in the future. The incident also reinforced the need for continued training, awareness, and communication within law enforcement. Misjudgment and fear could lead to dangerous situations, but proper guidance, intervention, and structured procedures could prevent escalation. The director knew that the experience would inform policies, teaching and awareness programs contributing to safer, more effective approaches to human interaction in stressful situations. In the days that followed, the story of the incident became a case study for professional reflection and learning. Internal reviews were conducted, accountability measures were implemented, and lessons were shared among law enforcement personnel. The director's calm handling of the situation served as an example of effective crisis management, demonstrating how composure, communication, and understanding could guide even the most unpredictable encounters to a safe resolution. The first officer faced the consequences of his actions, including review and temporary suspension, while the second officer received recognition for his professional and calm intervention. The director remained engaged in the follow-up, ensuring that the lessons were documented and shared for future training. The human element of the encounter, fear, misperception, and the ability to recover calmly, became the focal point of discussions, emphasizing the importance of empathy and professionalism. Through the experience, the FBI director gained a renewed appreciation for the unpredictability of human behavior and the value of calm, steady leadership. He understood how small decisions, measured actions, and patience could influence outcomes in high-pressure situations. The incident reinforced the importance of remaining composed, clear and empathetic in every interaction, highlighting lessons that extended beyond law enforcement into everyday life. In the end, the night had tested courage, patience, and understanding. What began as a frightening, tense encounter had concluded with learning, accountability, and reflection. The director's presence, the second officer's calm leadership, and the adherence to proper procedures had transformed a potentially dangerous situation into a moment of growth and insight. The lessons learned that night would resonate for years to come, a testament to the power of composure, empathy, and professionalism in navigating the complexities of human interaction.